coordinating the CE event for everybody and making sure that we have a great presentation for you today. So Curtis?
All right, thanks, Sierra. Well, thank you. My name is Curtis Miner. I'm an architect in Pleasant Grove, and we are fortunate enough today to be joined by Jim Yeoman, George Williams, and Jody Hilton, all of whom have been involved in the commercial design review process and building official world for many, many years. We had a number of discussions as a leadership group in the Central Utah section recently, and decided this would be a good topic to discuss as a group. And I look forward to hearing from our panelists today. By way of format, I've given the panelists a number of questions that we're going to draw from for our discussion today. We will be reserving 10 to 15 minutes at the end of our discussion for question and answer. You're welcome to hold your questions until that point, or if you'd like to include them in the chat feature down below, we can be monitoring those and add those to the discussion at the end. I'd like to introduce the panelists now. First, I want to introduce Jim Yeoman. Jim Yeoman started in construction in 1975 in Northern California. In 1985, he went to work as a senior building inspector for Riverside County in California and worked there until coming to Utah in 1992. He has worked for Orem City as a field inspector and a commercial plans examiner for the last 29 years. For the last 25 of those years, he has done after-hours peer review plan checks for many cities and counties in Utah under the business name Design Review Services. After 36 years in the industry, he still learns something new every week that keeps his job exciting. So welcome, Jim. George Williams is with WC3. George has worked in various aspects of the code and professional industry dating back to 2005. He is an Iecc Master Code Professional and Certified Building Official, and holds a wide variety of Iecc and IAPMO certifications. He has extensive experience as a building official, commercial building inspector, commercial plans examiner, energy code consultant, accessibility consultant, and residential code administrator. George has a master's degree in construction management and experience teaching a wide variety of code consulting courses, both in the classroom and online. George directs the development and administration of WC3's Code Academy, the industry's premier source for building and fire code related training and test preparation materials. So welcome to George as well. Jody Hilton has been in the building industry for since 1978, which is when I was much younger than I am now. And he has performed duties as an inspector and a plan reviewer for Salt Lake City, and a plan reviewer and building official for Sandy City. He has done code consulting and plan review for Sunrise Engineering, and now works for Shumskoda Associates. Jody has had plan review experience with high-rise buildings, hospitals, theaters, malls, and restaurants. And he has served 4 years on the ICBO Mechanical Code Committee, Change Committee, and 4 years on the ICC Mechanical and Fuel Gas Code Change Committee. Jody is the past president of the Utah ICC chapter, and a past member of the Utah LPG Gas Committee, Mechanical Committee, and Plumbing Committee. So Jody, thanks for joining us as well. We're excited to have our panelists here today, and I'm just going to jump right into questions. And so you're aware, the course of questions that I've attempted to create is really kind of laying the groundwork of the basis for code review in Utah, where the authority comes from, the processes that are used, and then the way each one of our panelists approaches a plan review. So I think what we'll do, I'll just identify one of our panelists, one or two of our panelists, to have them answer the question, and then we'll kind of rotate things that way. So first, maybe start with Jody. Jody, could you explain to our group today who holds the authority for the plan review in Utah, and who grants that?
The building code, and I'm referencing the administrative section 107.3, basically says that the building official can cause the plans to be reviewed, and when they're found to be in compliance with the code, mark them or stamp them, code compliant. To me, that's where the authority to do the plan review is in the building code. If you adopt it, if you enforce it, that's one section that tells you need to review the plans for code compliance. It also says on smaller plans or when the building official doesn't think it's necessary, that it's that. But I think that is the key in requiring plan review. And again, that's been done since I've been in the business since '78. There was a lot less complex buildings back then, but that's been the case. So I don't know really. I think the authority is to the building official when they adopt the code, or for example, now when the state of Utah adopts the code statewide. But I think that's one of the sections that allows you to do and requires you to do a plan review.
I see. Thank you. George or Jim, anything to add to that?
I took some notes on your questions before this started, and there's another section that allows the building official to delegate that to someone else within the department. I just think that's important based on kind of what some of the upcoming questions are. So
okay.
It starts with the building official and then can be delegated.
Okay, perfect. And as I understand it, if I'm not mistaken, the state legislature actually requires that each jurisdiction employ or designate a building official. Is that accurate?
I don't believe so.
No?
They're as we get away from the metropolitan, the big areas, as you move further down and the rural, everybody there is a building inspector. For some reason, I don't know. They might be performing duties as a building official, but their title is building inspector. So I don't know if that's something assumed, but I don't think it's required.
I see. Okay. Well, maybe that leads us into our next question. And Jim, maybe we'll direct this one your way. What training is required to be a plan reviewer? And are plan reviewers licensed or certified?
Well, I think first of all, you need to be a building inspector for quite a few years to learn the trade and learn what to look at. Myself, I went to college for 2 years and studied plan review and building inspections, and am certified in the field. And you get into some of the rural areas, some of them don't have the training or certification. And currently, I don't believe it's the law in Utah that the plans examiners be certified, but I can see that happening in the future.
Okay. Okay. So no certification required yet, but possibly coming. Okay. This next question, I think I'd like to have each of you take to respond to it in turn, beginning with George and then Jody and then Jim. What is, from your perspective, what is the purpose of a plan review? What are you looking for, and what things are not important to you in a plan review?
Great. Give me the hardest question. So I have four things that I think we're looking for as plans examiners. First thing would be code violations. So for example, the building's larger than the allowable area. That's kind of a problem. So code violations. Second would be safety issues, which generally are code violations, but I think you just are looking at things from a little bit different perspective. Third would be buildability. Can a contractor have enough information based on the plans that's provided in order to construct the building in accordance with the code? And then the last one is inspectability. And sometimes there may be information that the only purpose of us making a comment on it as far as a plan reviewer is concerned is because we know that someone else in our department needs to go out and inspect that. So that's kind of the one that I think sometimes can feel a little annoying to the design professional, because it's not necessarily tied to the buildability, and it may not be tied to necessarily a code violation, but we're trying to make sure the whole process runs smoothly.
Thank you.
And then your last question was what things are not important.
Yeah.
I think the things that should not be important to the plan reviewer are, the presentation of the information is up to you as the design professional. Now, there may be other ways we've seen it done that we would prefer, but it probably isn't in our purview to be dictating how you present information, because that's up to you. And that's definitely something we try to purge out of our review comments as we do them. They do sneak in at times though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Jody, your thoughts?
Well, coming from the school of hard knocks, I started out as an inspector. And I think the purpose of a plan review is to make sure that you catch or try to find code violations or problems on the plans. When I first started doing inspections, there were no certifications. They were just getting into certifications. A lot of the plan review in Utah and Salt Lake City in the area were engineers who had very little experience with the building code. So it was commonplace to go out and find windows in the wrong place, doors the wrong size, corridors built wrong. And so my thing immediately was, we need to get plan reviews done so we can get this on the plan. One of the most difficult things was fighting with a contractor over plans that were missed by the building department, also missed by the architect. So my thing has been to try to get the plan review to prevent problems out in the field where we have to cost large dollars to fix. And like I say, I'm not looking, there's things, paint, different things, there's trim, there's all kinds of things that I hear some people enforce, but you only want to enforce what's in the code, and again, try to make the plans as code compliant as possible without going into almost like zoning, where you're trying to measure the amount of trees in the front yard. And again, one of the most important things to me is life safety, to make sure that things are done that way, exiting, fire resistant construction. And then I'm a stickler for, when you do a plan review, give me a code analysis that I can understand and keep for the future. And I learned that in Salt Lake City. We had plans back to the early 1920s, and they had record of what was done, how it was. And you go to a lot of cities now and it's not there. So to me, that's just something we want to do, as clarification, that down the road, when I'm gone or when someone else is gone, whoever's doing a review or remodel on a building, that they can look at at least a portion of the plan and say, well, this is how it was done.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Jody. Jim, what do you think?
Well, I have to agree with the two prior comments. And what I do is I look for bare minimum code issues. I'm not there to enforce my opinions on a plan review. And I think our main job is to keep the architects, engineers, and the contractors off the 5 o'clock news.
That's a good way to summarize it. I like that. Okay, next question. And maybe Jody, let's start with you. And this actually might be a good one for everybody. So we'll start with Jody, and then Jim, and then George. Historically, most cities and counties have seemed to do, it seems like they've done their own plan review for the commercial projects. But recently, many jurisdictions seem to have moved to a third-party plan review. Why? What's going on there?
Well, in my opinion, it seemed like it was the late 1990s, early 2000 when this township thing came into play, where if you had a city and you're within a county and you were unhappy, that you could start your own city, and you could actually start your own city and form your own building department, monetary gain, whatever. And then also there was an urge with some new, I think, leaders in cities that, hey, we can save money by, instead of hiring our own employees and paying out all the stuff that you do for employees, benefits and everything, that we can contract it out and we can save cities lots of money. There's still cities working under that contention that we will, sub everything out, we'll hire it done. And if we can get the same service to our people, that's what we're going to do. I think that's what started it. Before then, it was all done within. And then again, in efforts to either obtain more quality or to save money, they started farming it out, having third party and subbing it out. And I think that's where it started.
Okay. Let's see, did we say Jim yet? Next?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Jody on a lot of that. And I think a lot of it is workload. We, as cities, counties, and state level, we have vacations that are needed, sick time, and a lot of times you find yourself, you got a lot to do and not people to fill those positions. That's why they went to the third party to help out.
So workload. Okay, George?
I've been around since 2005, so I've got a shorter term perspective than Jody and Jim, so they know some of that history. But my perspective is that when the recession hit in '08, it seemed like most building departments trimmed down to kind of a skeleton crew. And then we really haven't seen them ever successfully build their departments back up. And I think right now, I think I'm aware of 15 open positions in kind of northern Utah area of inspectors, plans examiners, and building officials that are in need. And there just isn't anyone to fill those positions. There's nobody with certifications who's just sitting on the sidelines. Jody works for a third party as well as I do, and we're always looking to hire people, and there's just nobody out there. So the cities are in the same boat, and when they get too busy, they send them to a third party. When we get too busy, we just start working nights and weekends. Right, Jody?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you called Jim to help out on the nights and weekends, I think.
Yeah, it's up a lot at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's helpful. That actually makes sense. Okay, so we as architects, as design professionals, we understand that there's immunity and there's some protection for those who perform building reviews. Does that same level of immunity transfer through to third-party review agencies, or is it different in some way? Let's start with Jim on this one.
Okay, yeah, I think it depends on how you have it set up with the jurisdiction.
Okay.
If I'm doing third-party reviews for a city, I try to work under their protection, because I'm giving them a list, and I really don't care if they enforce everything on that list. They send it off or do whatever they want for it. But it's up to that jurisdiction.
Okay. So George, from your perspective, operating an independent plan review firm, what arrangements do you have, or what liability are you concerned about in your review of commercial plans that could transfer back to constructability issues, building code issues, and so forth?
Right. So obviously the idea is that there is some level of governmental immunity afforded because we're acting on behalf of the city a vast majority of the time. So we have a contract with the city, and we'll get into that in a few more questions. And then we're acting on their behalf as if we were, working for their building department. We do carry full errors and omissions liability like a design firm would, but we don't do any design work. As far as we're stamping the plans in accordance with the code, and the stamp says reviewed for code compliance, meaning that an attempt was made to review those plans and catch what's in there. But personally, I don't feel like we're highly liable for what takes place beyond the approval process. We're not stamping the plans as a design professional, and we're not signing off necessarily on the inspections that take place during construction. So anyway, I don't think that influences our review drastically. It's not like we feel like we're putting ourselves in a highly liable situation, and because of that, we want to catch every single last possible thing that could be wrong. But anyway, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Next question. Let's start with.
Do you want me to respond?
Yeah, Jody, why don't you go ahead?
I'm sorry. So I've been around a long time, and I don't know if we have, when you're doing a review, if we have the liability that you may have as an inspector where you're missing something, whether it be in complete innocent or whatever. But when you're reviewing, we're basically, in my mind, putting another set of eyes on the plans to make sure that we've got everything done. We're reviewing, we're not designing, we're not changing, we're reviewing for code compliance. And it's like I say, errors and omissions insurance, but technically we're providing another set of eyes on the project. I'm not aware of anything happening that way, but it could. But again, I'm looking at it as, I don't know what type of liability or if there's any, and I'm sure there is. But again, when you're doing reviews, I think it's much less risk than when you're actually performing an inspection in the field. That's my take.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. All right. This next question, I suspect the answer is going to be slightly different for each of you. So I'd like each of you to respond to this one. And let's start with Jim and then Jody and then George. What is your process of review? Do you typically start with an all-inclusive list and eliminate, or do you start with a blank sheet of paper and you add things as you find them? Or is it some other approach?
I start with a blank piece of paper and make up my list as I go along. I do have a master list that of items that I find over and over and over for the last 30 years. I cut and paste onto that. I update that every 3 years to the new code sections. My first step is I look at the cover sheet. And I figure if that's right, I don't have to look so hard in the rest of the plans. If that's wrong, chances are the rest of the plan's going to have a lot of errors too.
Good. Okay. Jody, what's your process?
I have a master list also, and I only use portions of it. I look at one of my big problems is accessibility on the site. So I have quite a few of those items that I use as applicable. I have a mechanical plan review list, but typically anything to do with the building, but the exiting, when it comes down to code analysis, is something you have to do, list by list. But there are some areas that I use a list, and like say when it's consistently the same, it just speeds the process up.
Great. Thanks. George?
If I can share my screen, I'll show you two documents real quick. Is that possible, Sierra?
Yeah, give me just 1 second and I'll enable screen sharing for you.
Sure. So I'm along the same lines as Jim and Jody, where I start with a blank document and then I populate it as I go. Similar to what they said, we have some standard comments.
Curtis, you should be good to go. Perfect.
Is that the letter?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is just a blank document. We populate this table from the code analysis, and then I have everything organized into different sections. Now, we do have lists, and that's definitely a thing just to save us time in crafting a comment and finding the references. But we also use kind of an outline that goes chapter by chapter. So here's an example. And this isn't like a proprietary document, so I'd be happy to share it. But basically, this is the building code requirements, and then I go through by category. So use groups, see if there's any special uses, allowable height and area, types of construction. Then I go through my means of egress. And as an architect, if you were developing a way to kind of do a review of your own prior to submitting to a city, this might be a method that would be useful to you. So hopefully that gives you some insight on how the process works.
Yeah, that's great.
Now, how do I unshare?
If you just go to the top of your screen, it should say stop screen sharing. If not, I could stop it for you.
Yeah, just stop it for me. That'd be great.
There you go.
Great. Okay, thanks. That's helpful to understand your process. Next question. Let's start with George on this one. We'll go George, Jody, Jim. How are in your experience, how are third-party review firms selected, and do architects have any say in how those selections are made?
Sure. So for a long time, there weren't really a whole lot of options. I think you had Jim doing stuff in Utah County, and you had Jody and Sunrise doing pretty much everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I think there are a handful of firms. You've got Shumscoda, who Jody's with, WC3. Sunrise is still around. Jim's still doing his thing. And periodically, cities will send out an RFP, and then we'll all submit on the RFP. We'll state what our experience is, what our capacity is. Sometimes it's value-based, and sometimes it's related to fees. And as far as architects having a say in that, I think your feedback to the building official definitely would influence who's selected. Some cities will select 2 or 3 different companies and then send a percentage of the work to each one. And others kind of have a certain firm that they're familiar with and comfortable with. So sometimes that's the case as well. But I think any feedback you provide the building department is going to be productive, and they're going to weigh those comments, and it will influence who they send work to.
Great. Jim, Jody, anything to add to that?
Well, I agree with that. It's very competitive, and whether it's based on percentage, whether it's based on hours, the cities are trying to get the biggest bang for the buck, and it's just really tough sometimes to see how you come out in a process. Like say, we do the same thing on state projects, and that's even more incredible sometimes of how they pick that. But it's basically a price-driven or time-driven, process for plan review. And most of the time, the payment is, like say, based on what the agreement is, whether it be an hourly, whether it be a percentage or some other fee. But it's basically left up to the city or the jurisdiction and the third-party firm.
So really no set method of compensating third-party review firms. It's really up to negotiation between the two parties, as I understand it. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, Jim, anything to add on that question?
I agree with the two prior comments there. I believe that the city should offer, I think Park City would have 2 or 3 people to list, to choose from. I think other places should also.
Okay, good. All right. The next question. As design professionals, one of the things that we are very interested in is making sure that we make this plan review process as smooth as we can. That's in our best interest. It's in the best interest of our clients, and I think it's in the best interest of you and your organizations as well. So as architects, as design professionals, what things can we do to make your job easier? So maybe Jody first. What do you think?
Well, what I've found recently, and I don't know why, but it seems like a lot of designers are not putting as much information on their plan. Now, that might be to save somebody writing up another page of plan review comments, but they just leave it blank. So I don't know what's going in this room. And then you have to turn around and ask, where it seemed like years ago, whatever was going in, whatever was going to be used for, it was very clear. And I'm finding that more and more. And it's just now that I have to ask, what is the purpose? What's going to be installed? What chemicals do you have? What's going in? And so that would help me. The other thing, and I've got in trouble with this before, is, and again, I'm going back to problems, but when we're doing apartment houses, I see a single layer of 5/8 gypboard on hat channel for floor protection, roof protection, and nowhere is it saying in these details provided that it's got to be type C sheetrock. Now, my personal experience is I've had to have people rip that out when they put up regular 5/8 sheetrock. The contractor said, well, I was just trying to save him money. The owner said, well, I didn't know he was trying to save me money, but bottom line is, if it's not type C, it's not going to work. And so if it's on your detail on the plan and that type C isn't called out to me, a red flag goes up saying, we're going to have a problem. We might have a problem. So that's another one where I would say, the problem is if you pull that off a UL and you put it on the plan, or now you plagiarizing and putting something on the plans that you can't do. And I'm saying, hey, if nothing else, make a sheet, attach it to the plan with some 8x11, just so we know that it's type C, it's 5/8 type C sheetrock, not 5/8, just type X. So, and I guess that's just the information. And again, it might be that you've been beaten down by plan reviewers and you don't want to do it, but it just seems like from recent, it's, hey, I've got to guess a little bit. And all that does is, prolong the plan review process.
Perfect. Thanks. So being complete really is what you're recommending. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Jim, your thoughts. How can we make your job easier?
Just the complete information, the title sheet, complete, the code analysis complete. I'd like a little summary note in there, whether it be a piece of paper or on the title, on the cover sheet. Give us kind of an idea what you're doing. Take away any details that don't apply. I get a lot of plans that are commercial in nature, but they're using residential details. Just the more we know, the easier we can make your job.
Perfect. Thanks. George?
I feel bad trying to add anything to your plate. I at one point wanted to be an architect until I realized what you guys have to do, and I'm not cut out for it. So I don't want to add tasks to your already busy plates. And I know we have a lot of work going on everywhere, but things that would make the process run smoother. If you had the time, just to take one last quick pass through the plan, looking for, the right code references are called out and things aren't from, past cycles, that would be great. But I think probably the biggest way to speed up the process would be between the first review when you get comments and when the first resubmittal comes back in. I think that's kind of the golden time period where if we could communicate better, whether it be by phone or Zoom meeting or screen share or whatever else, and just figure out what the response to some of these items are going to be, then we'd get a lot more things approved on the second round rather than that third round. And that would save a number of weeks on every project. So I think this whole event you're doing today is great, because once we've seen each other's faces, it's a lot easier to pick up the phone and call, and it's enables communication.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that kind of gets us into the next question. As everybody's aware, the code itself, the international building codes, as well as the other codes that we deal with, fair housing, ADA, and others, they are complex, and sometimes they're contradictory, and sometimes there's not really clear direction based on those, or there's contradictions. So inevitably, there will be items that come up on a plan review where there's a disagreement, or there needs to be a further discussion. So from your perspective, what is the best way for us to have that discussion in a way that's productive and respectful, as opposed to, confrontational or difficult from both directions? So Jody, let's start with you on that one. What have you found to be the best when there are those disagreements?
Well, the first thing I would suggest is get on the phone and give me a call, the plan reviewer and or the building official, or get us both on the phone and discuss the problem and see if we can solve it. If there's usually questions with mine, I will call Iecc. I'm on a first name basis with Kim Ballberg over accessibility. We've got Steve Thomas on our staff. And so I have no problem trying to find out. And I tell people all the time, I'm too old to say that I'm always right. I can be wrong anytime. And so my thing is try to work through it. I respect the architects who have the code knowledge and try to do it. And again, if we work together and try to solve problems, it's just going to make my job easier the next time. And so I would invite communication, discuss it. And I'm hopefully that most building officials and plan reviewers are that way. I know that some have said certain individuals, I go in there and as soon as I start talking, I see the plan checker get red in the face. And he said, I know I'm already lost. I'm hoping that's going away. Again, when we talk to our fellow professionals in the biz, we say, make sure that you are have the right, I'm going to say body language and everything, so we can make these meetings acceptable to both parties. The more education, the more communication, the better it's going to be. So I would just say communicate, communicate, communicate.
Perfect. Thank you. Jim?
I would agree. Call me anytime, come in to see me anytime. Nothing makes me happier than get a plan out where I can write job well done.
You really do that on plans?
Yes, I do. And I've had architects frame it. But
Wow.
If I reject everything, on them when it's a really good plan, they're not going to even try the next time. They're just going to give me a junk set of plan and here, give me the pickup list.
Yeah. Great. Well, we'll be looking for some of those comments on our plans. George, what do you think?
I think good things have been said. We don't have a slogan or anything, but I like to remind our reviewers that we're in the business of approving plans, not rejecting plans, and that's the end goal. But I think the one distinction is sometimes if a judgment call needs to be made, it's generally not the third party reviewer that gets to make that call. It ends up being the building official from the jurisdiction. So that's why, like Jody said, if you can limp that building official into the discussion or get his feedback early on, then that particular item can be approved. And same thing, it's no skin off my back if such and such city decides to accept a certain exception that maybe I don't agree with. It doesn't keep me up at night. It doesn't frustrate me. I don't take personal offense to it. So just making sure the right people are involved in the conversation when that gray area needs to be, determined.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like from your perspective, it's a lot less personal than sometimes we make it. Is that right?
And we're all human. I mean, every once in a while, I'll pick up a review from, maybe it's a second review, and I'll read my own comments and think, man, I must have been having a bad day that day, So sometimes that does bleed into our comments, but it's not intentional. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I like the suggestion also of getting the building official, if there is a building official apart from the third party review person, getting that person involved as well, because as I understand it, ultimately it's the building official's call as to what is enforced and what's not from the original checklist. Absolutely. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, good. Well, the last question really is more of a general, kind of along the lines of our previous question. What, from your view, looking forward, now we're talking about the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, how does this process of design professionals creating plans, those plans being reviewed either by the building official and or third party reviewers, and ultimately getting to where we've got building permits and we're building buildings, what improvements can we all as a group make to make that process better? What do you foresee? Maybe Jim, let's start with you this time.
I think then it goes back to information and communication. If we can be involved from the start of the project, call me as when you're designing it, ask questions, see if there's any other way to do it. Like our job is to get the project done too.
So really being more proactive about it. You wouldn't be opposed to us calling and discussing different approaches at the building code then?
Correct.
Great. Okay. Jody, what do you think?
I think the proactive is if you have a question, if you have a concern, I have architects call me in cities and projects I'll never, look at and do a plan review, but ask me for questions. And I'm always trying to help. Again, I think the greatest thing in the world is an architect who knows the code and wants you to debate or ask your questions. So I'm always answering questions when it comes to code. If I'm lost, I call Jim and get advice from him. But, to me, that communication, that question, the more you can help, it's going to just make our jobs better and our future better, where we can work together as a team and not really. And of course, I guess I'm going to say in all my years of experience doing this, I don't think I've ever had a meeting with an architect where he was on one side of the room and I was on the other, or he hid his feelings very well and didn't let us know that, but it seems like we've always been able to come to an agreement, a mutual situation, and we were always trying to find a solution to work better or the best for all of us involved. So,
thank you. George, what do you think? How does this look going forward?
Maybe from a visionary perspective of the future. I mean, I think one challenge is on a plan review, there's this time period where comments are being compiled and everything else, and then they come to you all at once at the end of that review period. And if there was a way to get you comments kind of in real time as they're being made, then you would be able to start addressing the comments, a handful at a time, rather than feeling like you get 40 comments dumped on you all at once. But I would echo what they said. Just if we could collaborate more and probably just interact more, whether it's through our chapter meetings or other opportunities where we can kind of feel like we're all part of the same industry and all working towards common goals instead of us versus them type of mentality. So that takes time, but I mean, Jody probably knows 100 architects on a first name basis after so many years of doing this. I know like 25, so I'm working on it.
My age, I probably forgot more, but anyway.
Well, that's very helpful. I appreciate your perspective on that. For those who are listening in to our discussion today, we're going to open it up for questions in just a minute or two here. And I'd invite you to add those to the chat, and then we'll have Sierra focus on those questions as we move to the final few minutes. Before we turn it over to questions, though, I want to give each of you a minute or two to just say any final things, any final thoughts that you've had as you thought about our panel discussion today. Maybe starting with you, George. Do you have anything you'd like to add to conclude?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm glad you set this up. I think it's something that's been necessary, and I think as you understand a little bit of our perspective on what we're trying to accomplish, and we understand what it's like on yours. I mean, in your email, you talked about projects that just cycle through review and review and review, and the monetary cost that can have to your architectural firm. I think that's something that we need to make sure the plans examiners understand. And the other challenge is just that it takes time to learn all these codes, both on your end and on our end. So I definitely don't claim that we don't have review comments that are probably unnecessary at times, but we're working on trying to filter that out, and it's a process of training people over time. So if you can be patient with us, we'll be patient with you as well.
Deal. Yeah, sounds good. Jim, final thoughts?
Agreed. Just goes back to communication. My phone's always here, and you and I talked over the years. You've got this project's going on. What do you think? Can I do this? Can I do that? I give you my opinion. You know, we need more architects to do that.
Okay, good. Jody, what do you think? Any final thoughts?
Well, I was going to say, we all make mistakes. We've all written things up sometimes that we're already on the plans. I know that's a big concern for a lot of people. I know some people have saying, how many lists am I going to get? And all I can say is that we try the best we can. And again, with me is if there's problems, if you want to talk, communicate, call me. If I need to go somewhere for the meeting, I'd meet with you. I've never, that's something we'll do. So again, hopefully, if there's problems, if there's questions that we can communicate, we can talk and resolve any problem we have on the plan.
All right, thank you. All right, again, we appreciate each of you being here. Jim, did you have something else?
Yeah, I did. One other thing that we have to help the inspectors out too. We can sit here and look at a set of plans for 2 hours. They got 10 minutes. So when we say clarify or make the item pop, just make it easy for them to find it out in the field. They're going to wait for a very short time.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's something that I personally didn't really kind of take into account, is you need to help your inspectors do their job efficiently. So that's a good thing to remember as we're going through these. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions that have come in. I'm just going to read through them, and I'm going to leave it open. So if you feel like you want to jump in and kind of tackle this question or the questions that we ask here, please feel free. First question comes from Jessica Hoffman. Can you comment on how you may work together with other code regulation agencies, such as the health department? Do you ever notice items on plans and recommend discussion with other agencies?
I do. I guess I do all the time. I know that every restaurant has to have a health You have to get a review by the health department, so it's on my plan review. Some cities require, when you're putting in grease traps and sampling manholes, that you have to get those approved, even though it's not required by code. But the sewer district wants to look at them and look at the waste going in. So anytime I'm aware of anything like that, I put it on the plan review just as more than a reference, not that it's a requirement, but a reference. And so I just think it helps process.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I agree too. You know, a lot of times we'll do a high-rise building or something like that, and I know the elevator inspectors want a vision panel. It's not required by my code, but it shows up at the end of the project. And it's really hard to fix. So I'll make them aware that they need to contact the elevator inspector or any other boiler inspector, whoever is dealing with that situation.
Okay, good. All right, great. The next question comes from Danielle Clark. The 2018 IECC section C402.5 air leakage is a pretty involved section, but generally seems to require blower door tests. Many jurisdictions don't seem to be enforcing this. In the panelists' opinions, do they agree that this section requires blower door tests? If so, who should be responsible for enforcing or excusing the blower door test requirement?
Well, we require them in NORM, and most of them we refer to a third-party inspection. So it'd be like Earth Tech or CMT or something like that to go out and do them.
I would say if you wanted to put enough detail and notes in your plans, I think there's room in the code to have an alternative to the blower door test. But generally, that's beyond really what you're going to want to do as a design professional. And the level of inspection that would need to take place to confirm that is also pretty involved for the city. So I think that's why you end up landing on the blower door test, because it requires less detailing on the architect's side. It requires no inspection on the city side. And then the test takes place, like Jim said, third party comes out, does the blower door test, and we know what the results are. So that's preferable. But as far as who excuses it, I think it's just goes back to the building official. If they're not enforcing what's in the code, they're the one person in the city that gets to determine the level of enforcement. So.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And as you get further south or in rural Utah, you can write that on the plan review, do a blower door test, or see if the building official will let you inspect all the components. And a lot of cases, it's just kind of left in the wayside and not even looked at. I'm finding that out a lot. And again, we're trying to educate the building officials on, hey, you need to do this. A lot of people are trying, but again, in a lot of cases in rural Utah, you can write it up and nothing's getting done.
Yeah, okay. Well, I suspect a lot of those principles also apply to other provisions of the code, which, sometimes are enforced and sometimes are not, where, we try to do our best to come up with a solution, maybe discuss it with the building official and try and come up with something that's mutually agreeable. So.
Can I ask a question kind of along those same lines?
Sure.
So I don't fault you for doing this, and I'm not specifying any architect, but does the design package you put together, do you design it the same way every single time, or do you design it to where you're submitting it? Like if you're submitting to Eureka, Utah versus Salt Lake City, is your design package going to be the same? Or are you going to kind of lighten it up for the rural community because you probably can? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I didn't know I was going to be on the panel today, but hey, that's all right. In our firm, our procedures, our process is such that we really it doesn't make sense for us to degrade anything, to take anything away. Our procedures are really built around the most difficult or the most complex or sophisticated plan review that we actually participate in. And so I don't know that we would remove anything deliberately if we're going through a jurisdiction that we think is not as sophisticated. That may be different for other architects, but at least in our company, that's not a common practice.
Great.
Yeah. Well, we have time probably for one other question. This one's interesting. This comes from Jessica Hoffman, and it kind of gets into a slightly parallel but different topic than what we've been discussing today. The question is, do you ever have occasion to report non-architects or unlicensed designers to the Department of Professional Licensing? How does that
Well,
work?
let me answer that.
Yeah.
I have turned several people in. At one point, I was called a liar. Didn't know what I was doing. That was an engineer who was designing a building, and if you'd listened to him, I was a total idiot. And I finally asked the Doppel investigator. I said, just ask him a simple question. I said, why ask him what year of code we're enforcing? He couldn't answer it. And so anyway, and then they fined him $600. That was it. One time $600 fine and whatever. So when I see him, the problem that I'm running into is some of the jurisdictions I'm doing, some of these, and I shouldn't say engineers, some of the designers are on the council and they have ties to the council. And so one of the best ways for me to lose a job is to turn them in. So I talk to the building official and say, what do you want me to do? And if he's recently or whatever, if he says, don't touch it, I'm not, then that's what I'm doing. But it is rampant. And like say, I don't know what we're going to do because like say, if you look at one time, I thought it was 5,000 square feet or 3,000 for an engineer. And we've got warehouses that are 10, 12, 15,000 square feet. And there's no, they do not want to have an architect there. In fact, the last one, I said, well, you're going to have to do something because you need to sprinkle the building. And he had no idea. It was over here, it had to have a sprinkler system. And so
Storage unit.
we're working on it. And again, if I see it, if I have any question, I say, go to Doppel, get me a letter saying that they will allow you to be the architect and engineer on this project. And that seems to stop a lot of the problems, but there's a lot of it going on.
I see. George, Jim, what do you think?
I just defer to the building official. So kind of along the lines of Jody, if the building official wants to turn them into Doppel, then great, but I'm not going to be the one doing it. I don't want to impact somebody's livelihood necessarily. And like Jody said, I'm not convinced Doppel's really going to do much about it. So.
Jim, have you had any experiences with that?
Yeah, in the early days, I turned quite a few into Doppel and worked through the process with them. One of my favorite things to call was a wet stamp on the plans. I took a lot of heat of that because the architect didn't want a wet stamp. I don't want every page wet stamp, just the cover. And so many times I've gotten plans in and contacted the architect, asked questions. He says, well, I never proved that to be built norm. You're not getting paid for it. That's why I'm being hard in wanting to wet stamp. Now it's digital, so that's kind of gone away.
Yeah. Well, that's great feedback on that question. So we are at the end of our time, at the end of our hour. Maybe if I could just summarize what I've learned today, it seems like clear communication, even at the beginning of a project, as we're in design, talking about different design ideas, different ways to solve a particular design challenge or a problem or an issue is helpful. Also being really clear in our communication on the plans, recognizing that it's not only for the purpose of plan review, but also for building inspection, that you are attempting to put together a set of plans or to verify that we've got information included in the plans that will make your inspector's job a lot easier. And then if there are things that need to be discussed, just being open about it, communicating clearly, recognizing we're all trying to do our job. Nobody's taking it personally, that we're all trying to work together. Well, I appreciate each of you being part of our panel today. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to working with you on future projects. George, we did have a question that came in late. There was a question about whether we could get a copy of that plan review checklist that you had. if you could forward that back to me or Sierra, I can send it back through the AIA to the people that participated today. That would be helpful.
Sure. Sounds
Thanks.
good.
Right. All right, Sierra, anything else?
Nope, that sounds good. Once we get that code checklist, we'll be able to include it in our follow-up email out to all the participants so they have access to it. And we'll also attach our live stream and event recording. So if there's any information that people want to review from the event, they're able to do that there.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Sierra. And George, Jody, and Jim, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.